Hello and welcome. In this video I'm going to show you how to build a trading simulator from scratch using Excel VBA. A trading simulator allows users to view prices as if they were happening in real time, and this allows them to practice trading. Having a simulator like this will allow you to practice this trading with any type of sample data that you have. Most of the code in this application will be written using class modules. So if you want to see a real-world application built using class modules, then look no further. Make sure that you download the source code for this video from the link in the description. If you like the video, please click on the like button, and to get notified of any new videos that I release, click on the subscribe button and the bell icon beside it. So the first thing that we're going to do is have a look at the trading simulator that we're going to build. So this is our trading simulator, and what it essentially does is the chart moves through the prices that we have, and it adds one new price each time. So it looks like it's reading through the data sequentially, which is actually what it is doing pretty much. So if we look at the prices that we have on this worksheet, we've just got example set of data, and there's 1,000 prices, and you can see in the right hand side diagram of how the prices go up and down. So in our player we can set the data range to be whatever we want. We could say 501, we could say we want 1,001, and we can set it to whatever range our data is at, and we can set it to any worksheet. So it's very useful because often when we're running a simulation, we want to try it on different pieces of data. Now the play settings up here, frame weight is basically how many points that can be shown at any time. So the maximum number of points. The move interval is how many new points we show. We're running at a speed of normal. So every second it will add one new point. Now if our move interval was 5, it would add 5 new points. So you can see our speed over here is normal. And if we press play, you'll see that we get a new point every second. Now, as the points come through, we can actually change the speed if we want. We could set the speed to be 4x. And you can see now that the points are going much faster. Now, at any point in the proceedings, we can just click pause and we can look at the data at this stage. And we can use the left and the right buttons here just to move one at a time. Now, these move based on the move interval. So if we set the move interval to be 10, you can see they would jump back 10. So really very useful the way that we can configure how the chart works. Now one thing we can also do, and let me just put this back to 1. One thing we can also do is we can use our slider. So our slider allows us to move to any position. And if we move it again, you can see we're at 802. And we can move it right very close to the end here. Now we can actually move it to the end obviously, but I'm moving it close to the end just to show that when we press play, it will actually stop when it reaches the final value. So once it reaches the final value, we can't go right anymore, but we can go left if we want, and we can go right and go back. Now if you click on the reset button, it just resets the chart back to what it was. So this is very useful for practicing trading in our data. Now what I'm going to show you today is how to build this trading simulator. But once we have the trading simulator in place, we could add other very useful things to it. So let's have a look at this one. So we press play and you can see that it's playing as normal. And if we click on this, we can add trend lines. Now in this case, I've added 2 moving averages of different lengths, and we can just click to have them off again. So this is very simple to do. And we could do this, we could have the configuration of the moving average lengths on our worksheet if we required. Now you can see down here, we've got a little kind of trading interface, and with this trading interface what we could do is we can see the latest prices are coming in. So at any point we can click okay, let's buy, and now we're buying it, and you can see the latest. It goes between red and green depending on whether it's currently at a profit or a loss. And so if it goes on to a profit, we could just say okay, let's sell, or maybe we sell because we want to get out. So it's going down, and let's say we just say okay, let's sell it now, and you can see it shows our buy, our sell, and our profit. So also another possibility for something that you could do once you have the trading simulator in place. So what I'm going to look at today is the basic simulator itself. And once you have that, as I said, there's a lot that you can do. So let's go ahead and start coding the simulator. A quick pause to tell you about the Excel VBA Handbook course. Are you struggling to build VBA applications? Do you find it difficult to get good information on how to create real-world VBA code? Is it a struggle every time you try to create a VBA application, no matter how simple it is? Well, the Excel VBA Handbook course teaches how to build real-world Excel VBA applications from scratch. Unlike most courses, you won't be overwhelmed with information and left to figure out how to put it all together. Instead, you'll be taken step by step through 10 Excel VBA applications with every concept explained. Once you start working through VBA applications, you'll be amazed how quickly your VBA skills increase. So check out the VBA Handbook course at the excelvbahandbook.com, and the link can also be found in the description below the video. So let's press Alt F11 to enter the Visual Basic editor, and then once we're there, we're going to create a settings class. So the settings class is simply going to hold variables, and these variables are going to be used to store the different settings on our worksheet. So for example, we're going to have public and we're going to have current position, and that's going to be a long. And we're going to add one variable for each of the different settings that is on the worksheet. Once we have all the variables added, we want to create our second class then. And our second class, the function of that is to read in these settings. So we're going to call that class the settings reader class. We're going to start off by creating a const variable. What a const is basically a variable that won't change or can't change as our code runs. And we use this to store the cells where our configuration data is. So the advantage of this is that we're going to be storing them in one place, and this variable cannot be changed by some other code. So if in the future we decide we want to write the configuration setting somewhere else to a file or something, it's very easy to update it from being a const into reading it to a file. The key thing to remember is that we just have the cell value defined in one place in our application. So I've created a read from sheet sub. What we want to do is we want to have a private variable, and the private variable will be for our worksheet. So this is the worksheet, which is going to be the player worksheet. And then we're going to have a second private variable, and this is going to be the class module that we created. So by having it private as new, we're creating what we say an instance of that object. So it basically means that we can use the variables that we've just created. Now we use our initialize class here. So every time a new object, so our class module is created, whenever we use that, what happens is the class initialize is kicked off. So in other programming languages, we call this a constructor. So when our class initialize happens here, we're going to set msheet settings to be the sheet player. We do it like this because in the future we could change how we decide what sheet we're reading from. We're going to call read from sheet. So as soon as we use new for this class, it's going to automatically read the data from the sheet, and it's going to store it in the variables in our CLS settings object. So this is how we're going to do it. So I'm just starting with current position. Once we can see that one works okay, it's very easy then to add the other ones. So we're basically saying the current position variable in our settings object, and we want that to equal to our sheet and to the range. And of course the range is what we've defined in our constant above. And then we use value just to get back the value. So the easiest way always to test out if our class is working is just to create a test, and that's what we're going to do in a moment. Now what we want to have here is the properties, and the properties allows us to give back the different values. So the easiest way to create the property is by using insert add property, and we're going to call this one current position. So when we click OK, it creates a let and a get. So this means how we assign the property and how we read the property back. Now if we get rid of the let, it means that the property is read only, because we don't want current position to be set, because we're reading current position from the worksheet. So we're saying if someone looks for current position, we basically read it out of the settings, and we delete the let because we want it to be read only. We don't want someone to set current position to the reader class from outside the class. So this is one variable that we have, its current position. We're going to test this out by using a test module. And we'll call this test module, so it's very easy to see that it's going to be used for testing only, and when we're finished we can delete it, so we don't have to take it too serious. And we don't come back later and think what we're using it for. So we declare our object reader as new, and so what this will automatically do is kick off the read, and then we'll just do a debug print and we'll get back the current position from the property. So run the code to see what exactly happens, and you can see that it wrote 1 back because our current position is 1. So that's the value in the cell. So if we step through the code, you can see when it creates the new setting, the settings reader, it does class initialize, and that calls read from sheet, and the read from sheet places the value from the worksheet in current position. And then we go to the current position property, and that will return the current position. So very simple. Once we have this in place, then all we've got to do is we've got to add it for all the other variables. So the key thing always is just get it working for one. Once you're happy that it works for one, it's very easy to add it to the other ones. So let's add a second variable so that we can see that it's working correctly for the second variable. And once the second variable is okay, we'll just go ahead and add all the rest. So again, we take the number of prices. We're going to create a property, and that property is going to read from the number of prices in settings. Now we add number of prices as the property name, add it as the settings variable, and then that's just going to be what we're going to get back from the property. So then of course we want to read the value. So when we do a read from sheet, we're going to read it from the position. So we're just going to be reading to the variable number of prices from settings, and we're going to be reading from the const for the number of prices. So doing our code this way makes it very straightforward, makes it very readable as well. We can see exactly what's happening and we can spot errors. So we want to test what we've just done. So we're going to use the number of prices to make sure that this one worked correctly. So we'll go ahead and run the code, and you'll see that it brought back the number of prices as being 1000. So now that we've got a pretty solid understanding that it's working, let's go ahead and add all the other ones pretty quickly. So just copy and paste the constants, the properties, and the reading of the settings, because we've already seen twice how they work. Now we've got two different types of properties that we want to add here as well. So one of them for our slider, we have what's called a link cell. So we link our slider to the current position, and that's how the slider works. So we'll be looking at that a bit later, but our current position is N13. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pass it back the actual constant, because the constant has the actual cell address. So the constant has the cell address, and so that's what we want. So we're just going to basically use the constant in this case. And we'll be given that address to the slider. We'll see this in a later section. Now the other one that's a little bit different is our playing setting. What playing does is it allows us to know whether we're currently playing, so we're currently running through the different prices, or if it has stopped. So if we click on stopped, we want to change that status, and that will basically determine if it's running currently or if it's playing currently. So we have playing or we have stopped on the spreadsheet, so we want to convert them into a true or false essentially. And how we do it is really quite easy. So we simply check if the value in the position, if it equals to playing. So we say whatever's at the range, and we use the cell, and that is the status. And what we say is if what's at that equals playing, then what we want to do is return true. So if it equals playing, it will return true. If it doesn't equal playing, it will return false. Now we do the same thing when we're setting. If we want to set playing to false, we basically pass it the status, and then we just assign the status to equal to. If it's true, we set it to playing, and if it's false, we want to set it to stopped. So we use an if statement here. So this is like an if statement in Excel. The first part is a condition, the second part is if it's true, and the third parameter is if it's false. So we'll use this later, say when we're playing our prices and running through them, or when we're trying to stop it. So the next thing we're going to do is create our CLS chart. Now, the first thing our chart is going to have is a chart variable. And this is going to be obviously of type chart. So this allows us to reference the chart. The next thing we want to do is add an initialize sub. So we select class from the left menu, and this automatically creates the initialize sub. Now the initialize sub automatically runs when we create a new instance of a class. So what we wanted to do is, as soon as we create a new instance of this class, we want to set it to the chart on our player worksheet. And this is how we do it. We use chart objects and the name of the chart. So now we want to add the property for setting the data. So this is something we're going to be doing later, but we'll just add the property now. So at any point when we're using our simulator, we can change what the source data is, and this property allows us to do it. So it's very simple. We're just taking the range as a parameter, and we're basically just passing that to the set source data sub. Now the next one that we're going to look at is the most important one, and it's kind of the core part of this simulator, and that is the sub for moving the chart. So this is going to take a frame as a parameter. So the frame is a very simple class, and we'll be creating that in a moment. And then once we have the frame, which is basically our start and end position, we'll be setting the chart position. What does setting the chart position mean? So let's have a look at that now. So before we write the code to move the chart, let's look at the working version of the simulator to understand what it's doing. So we've got 1,000 points loaded into our chart here. What this means is that when we're going through the chart, all we're ever doing is looking at a certain frame of data. So in this case, we're looking at 200 points. So we're looking at 182 up to 381. Now, if we move the chart to the right, so we click on right, what we're actually doing is just moving our frame. So now we're starting at the point 183 and we're moving to the point 382. So as we keep moving to the right, it looks like we're getting new points in, even though the points exist in the chart, but the simulator makes it look like we're getting new points in. And so it simulates like it's doing live trading. So what we want to do to achieve this is we want to format our axis. So we right click on this axis and we go to format axis, this one here, which is the minimum and the maximum. So you can see it says minimum 182, maximum. So what we do, now let me just move the chart over, is we just change these each time. So if we move one to the right, we'll change our minimum to be 183. And see the chart move slightly, and then we'll change this one to be 408. And you can see that the chart moved on. And that's essentially what we're doing. So that's what we're going to be doing, setting the minimum and maximum axis. Now, one other thing that we want to do is, if we move on the data, you can see that the range of data changes. And if we don't set the y-axis correctly, the data is going to be off. So this is our y-axis. We're automatically setting it. But just imagine that we didn't set it. And let's just put it at like 20. And let's put the maximum at 22. So now you can see we've lost all the points on it. Now it might not always be that bad. We could have something like this where we see a certain amount of the points, but the other points are missing. So we want to set our y-axis so that it always contains all the data and it kind of centers it on our chart. So what we do basically is we get an array of all the points in that are going to be shown on the chart, and then we get the min and maximum value, and we set the range to be one above the max and one below the min. So if we just play as normal, you can see that our points are always nicely positioned on our chart, and you can see as they go up and get higher that the chart adjusts accordingly. So let's go and write the code to do this now. So our move chart sub takes a frame as a parameter. So let's create that frame module. Now the frame module is simply a class module that has two variables. And the reason that we have it as a class module is that it makes it much easier to pass it around. So in the future, if our frame had 4 variables, then it would be a big change in our code to go around everywhere and change for the 4 variables. But when we have it in one single object, we've only got to make the change in one place. So now that we have the frame set, what we want to do is we want to set our axis, and we'll start by setting the x-axis. So Excel category is what we do to select the x-axis, and Excel value is for the y-axis that we'll see in a minute. And then we use minimum scale and we use the start position. So our first point will be at minimum scale and our second point will be at maximum scale, which is our end position. So once we have this done, we want to go on and do our y-axis. Now the problem with the y-axis is that we want to get all the values between the start and end position, and we want to get the max and minimum of these values. So there's no real simple way that we can get the values. So we've got to write our own function, and what this function will do is give us back all the values between the first and last positions. So we use full series collection. That's all the data on the chart. We use the start position and the end position, and then this function will give us back an array of the values. And then we'll set them using Excel value. So what we use in this case is the worksheet function minimum, and we'll pass it the array, and this will give us back the minimum value from the array. And we'll set our y-axis to be this -1. And we'll do something similar with the maximum, except we'll set it to be +1. So let's go ahead and write this get current values sub, or this get current values function. So just in case you don't know, the difference between a function and a sub in VBA is that a function returns a value and a sub doesn't. So the first thing we want to do is check that the first isn't before 1, because sometimes the first that we have position on the chart may not have any values. So if it's less than 1, we want to set it to 1. And if it's greater than the number of values, we want to set it to be the last one. So again, this is because in some cases we can have points on the charts that are not actually values. So once we do this, we want to create our new array. And our new array will be the size of the number of items at last minus the first item, and we want to add +1. So that gives us the total number of items. So then what we do is we run through the array. So we start at the position first, and what we'll do is we'll go to last. Now, position that we use here, the variable, this is used as the position in our new array. So we'll create the for loop now for i equals first to last, and then we set array new position, which is position 1 at this point, and this is going to equal the position in our current values variable. So if the first position is 200, we're basically saying in the new array, position 1 put 200. The next time it'll be 201 will be put to position 2, and so on. And then we finish our for loop, and what we do then is we return the array using get current values assigned. And so once we have it done, then what we want to do is we want to test it out. So to test, we go back to our test only module, and we're going to create a simple sub. So we declare our chart, and this creates a new chart, and then we create a new frame object. So we set the positions in the frame object. I'm going to set it from 100 to 300. And then once that's done, we'll move the chart and we'll pass in the frame. You can see how little code it actually takes to do this once we've written it as class modules. So only a few lines of code that we need to actually move the chart. So let's run this on our current chart and see what we get. So we run the code, and you can see that it starts at position 100 and that the last position on the chart is 300. So let's change the values and let's do it again, just to show that it's working. Now this will form the basis of our simulator, the way that we move the chart. So we're starting at 450 and 750. So let's run our code again and see what happens. You can see that it ran correctly. It set our chart to 450 points up to 750 points. So what we're going to do next is we're going to add the code that will move the chart right 1 when we click on the right button. So we start off by adding our click events module. So the click event modules hold all the different subs that run when we click on the different buttons on the worksheet. So we put them all in click events so they're easy to manage and easy to organize. And we always end their name with _click. Let's just put a message box in here just to ensure that it works right. So this is going to be a very simple test. So when we click on the right button, we should see a message box. So we go to the worksheet, we right click on the button and we assign macro. This brings up all the public macros. We just double click on move right. So now when we click on move right, you see that it brought up the move right message box. So this button is now assigned to the move right _click sub. So now we're inserting a class module. And what this class module is going to be used for, it's going to be used for moving the frames. So this is going to be, if we want to move a frame left, we want to move a frame right, or we want to move a frame to a certain position or to the start even. So we'll start off by declaring the variables that we need. So we have a frame as a private variable. So we saw the frame already for the chart. So this is what the chart takes. And the frame basically just has an end position and a start position. And this is what we'll be giving to the chart. So the frame width is the width of the frame. So these are settings that we read from the sheet, and we're going to be passing them into this class module. So we want the frame width, the number of prices, and we want the move interval. And we'll set these in our initial function. So when we're finished with our frame, when we move the frame, what we do is we pass it back. So we're going to set a property for the frame. And this will essentially set back or send back the m_frame. So after we move, we basically just get the frame, and then we can use this frame to move the chart or to move a scroll bar or something like that. Now we have an init function. So in other languages, we have a constructor. So when we create a new instance of an object, we can pass in parameters. We can't do this in VBA, so we have to create our own init sub. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be passing in the different values. So we're going to be passing in frame width, number of prices, and the move interval. And then we're going to assign these to the private variables that we have. So we're just splitting up this line just because I'm using big text on my screen, and this makes it just easier to read. So we can split a line over multiple lines by using the underscore. So now we take in all these values and we're just going to set them. So m_frame, our private member, is going to equal to the one we pass in. So at the start, when we create our new frame position object, we're going to use init and we're going to set these values. So then our frame position class has these to perform calculations with. And what we do is we set an initial frame as well. So we want to set the initial frame to whatever the current position is. And we have a sub called update frame. An update frame creates the new frame from the given position. So if we set a new position is 20, it will create the frame for position 20. So again, we've one sub to do this, because if in the future we wanted to change how we created our frames, then we'd only change it in one place, and that would be an update frame. So the update frame is very simple. It's just doing a calculation. It sets the end position as the position and then does a calculation for the start position. And that calculation is minus the frame width. So very simple, really. So every time that we do some kind of movement, we update the frame. And as I said, we update it at the start so that our frame has a position, and we want to move the frame then, we're going to move it from its initial position. So here's our move right sub. So when we move it right, what we want to ensure is that we're not moving past the end of the values. So we set the new position first, and then we check that the new position is okay. So the new position will equal the current position plus whatever our move interval is, which is 1 at the moment. And now that we have the new position, we want to check that the new position is valid. We use the function checkPosition is at end to check if we've reached the last value. So again, rather than having us doing calculations in move right and in all the different ones where we're checking for the end, we just have one checkPosition at end sub. So if in the future we decide how we're checking the position at the end is going to change, we're just making that change in this function. We don't have to make it anywhere else. We don't have it in lots of places in our code. So it's very good to have a dependency on subs like this. So how we check it's at the end, if position is greater than or equal to number of prices, we don't want to move any further right. So in other words, if check position at the end, so we give it the new position, if this position is at the end, then we won't do anything. But if it's false, then we're going to move it to the right. So we basically update the frame, as we saw already, with the new position. So in other words, the new position equals the current position plus the move interval. We check if it's valid. If it's valid, we update the frame. If it's at the end, we don't do anything. As always, when we create new objects, it's very good to test them on their own. And you can see the benefit of objects is that we can actually take these objects and test them in isolation from other objects. And this makes the code very flexible indeed. And it means we can do an awful lot of testing before we actually start using the class modules in our applications. So we create the new frame position, and here is the init. And all we're going to do is pass it the values from reader. So whatever the current position is that we read off the worksheet, the frame width, the number of prices, and the move interval. And then we're going to move it to the right, and we're going to check if this is valid. So we can just use our chart that we created already, and we just move the chart. And you can see how easy this is. We've basically used a few lines of code now that we have the modules declared. We use frame position, and we just pass back the frame using the property of the frame position class module, and we give that to our move chart. This is one thing that we just have to do now. We're just updating. So this is something I'll be getting rid of when we're not testing, but we just have to update the current position after we move the chart. So we update it on the worksheet, otherwise it won't keep moving right. So let's go ahead and check it out. So we set the value to 250, and let's run our code and see exactly what happens. So we've just got to, before we do that, we've just got to do our test. So we're going to just put our test reader in here. And so when we click on the right button, it's going to move us to the right bit using our test reader. So let's click on this button, and you can see that it moved to 152. So we click it again, you can see 153, 154, up to 15, and so on. And we keep clicking it right, it looks like it's playing through all the different values. So that's how easy it was to do our move right once we have our move chart created already. So now we want to create the class, and this class will take care of the movement. So this class will create our frame position, and it will call the move chart and do the various different things depending on if we're moving right, moving left, and so on. So we call this class movement manager. So we're going to have our variables in the class, and the variables we're going to have are going to be the frame position, the one that we've just looked at. So we're going to have that as one of the members of the class, and we're also going to have the reader. So we can read the data, and then we can move it based on what position we're in and based on what the user has clicked. So we want to create a class initialize, and again we always get that by just selecting class, and it'll automatically generate the initialize. And initialize is always kicked off when we create a new instance of this object. So when we use CLS Movement Manager, it will automatically run the class initialize. And when we run that, what we want to do is we want to set playing to false. And the reason we do that is in most situations, if it's playing and we want to do something else, we set playing to false. So playing is only true when it's actually playing. In all other circumstances, it's set to false. So when we want to do something else, we turn off the playing. Now we set the position, so we have a position here, and we're going to set the position to be the reader current position. And we're just going to take our frame position that we were using in test, we're just going to use that here. So it's the same as we saw in test what we're actually doing here. We're creating the frame position and we're passing it whatever the current position is on the chart. So that's what it will do at the start. So it creates the frame position with the initial frame. And then when we want to move it, we can easily move it by selecting move left, move right, or whatever. So this is our move right in the movement manager, and we'll be calling this from our mod move. So the mod move we've created, and this is where we're going to be creating the move manager from. So our click events calls this one because we don't want anything in our click event, and then in our click event we create the movement manager, and in the movement manager we say move right. And so we'll just put it here in our click event called move right. So if we click on move right now, you can see that it works. It actually moves right. So we've got our code all in place. Now let's put in a breakpoint so we can actually see what's happening. So we stop on move right, we step into this one, and this creates the movement object that we just created. And we go into the movement object, we set the sheet equal to the player sheet. So we've created the new player, and now we use the current position, initialize the frame, and then when we go to move right, you can see we select move position to move right, and this is what we saw already. After it moves it right, we have got a new frame, and we give that frame to move chart, and that moves it. And then at the end, we're setting the position back, so we're setting the reader position so that the position will be correct after we've moved. So the code that we have here with the chart this can get a bit long-winded because we're also going to be updating our scroll bar, and we could be updating a trade or other things on our worksheet. And the problem is that for every move we do, we're repeating this code and it gets a bit messy. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to create a class, and the class will take care of updating our worksheet. So we're going to call this UI Manager. So UI for user interface. And after we do a movement, this is going to take care of moving everything. So moving the scroll bar, moving the chart. And if we had trades in place, it would take care of that as well. So it's very, very simple what we're going to do. We're just going to have an update position, and this is going to take the frame. So this will be the frame that's just moved. And all we'll do is call the different subs that will update different things like the chart or the scroll bar. So we're updating calling the update trade as well. Now this is just for an example. I won't be implementing it in this video. And it just goes to show that if we had all these different things to implement, how we would do it. So we just simply pass the frame to each one of these, and then it's very simple. So our update chart, the code for this is quite simple. We just have a private member as the chart. So the code is very similar to what we had in movement, but the only difference is we're only going to need it in one place. And we put it under update chart. We simply call move chart and we pass it the frame, as we've seen this done before. But the difference, as I said, is that we're only going to have to do this in one place in our code. Now we need to add an instance of this new class module to our movement class. And we'll call it UI Manager, and we'll say as a new UI Manager. Now then, after we move right, we just simply call the update. So we update the position and we pass it the current frame that we've just updated. So we've done a debug compile, there was no errors. So let's actually check if this code works with our new change. So we click on the right button, and you can see that we're getting new values as we click on the right button. So what we're going to look at now is the scroll bar. So the scroll bar is like the bar you see at the end of any video. So if you look at any video website, we basically can drag the video by using a scroll bar. So we're going to use the same idea here. And we're going to format the control. The control is very simple. It just has a minimum value, a max value, whatever the current value is. And it has the incremental change, which means every time we move it, how much it changes. And the page change is when we just click on to the right of the icon and it moves on. So in this case, it's 10. Now the cell link is very interesting. This is the cell that has the position. You can see A1 has the position here. And as we move the scroll bar, you can see that that value changes. So this is very useful for us because it means if we change the scroll bar, it'll automatically update the position. And if we change the position, it will automatically update the scroll bar. So this is very useful indeed. So let's add our scroll bar class. Our scroll bar class is going to take care of what we need to do with the scroll bar. And you'll be surprised actually how little code we really need for the scroll bar. We really just need to set the initial settings, and then we just need to set a position. So again, we have the class initialized. So as soon as we create the scroll bar class, we'll basically assign the scroll bar shape, which is the variable. We'll assign this to the scroll bar on our worksheet. So setting the scroll bar settings. So this is the initial one that we'll do at the start. So this will change when somebody sets a new set of prices as the source data. We'll want to change what the min and the max is. Or if someone changes the move interval, we'll want to update the move interval. So we simply just take these values that are passed in and we update the scroll bar settings. So these are the ones we looked at a few minutes ago on the scroll bar itself. So we just set the min to 1. The min actually should be set to min. I'll just change that. We set max to the max that we're getting in. The move interval, the small change is basically the move interval. We'll change that to move interval. The page change, we don't have any configuration setting for that. So we'll just leave it at 10, which is standard. And then the link cell is going to be the link cell parameter that we've passed in. So now we're going to set the scroll bar position, and this one is even easier than the previous one we've just done. We basically just take the position and we just set the value. And we do this whenever the value has changed on the chart, because we want to update the scroll bar so that they're in sync, basically. So this is very simple to do. We just use control format, and then we use the value, and we set it to whatever the current position is. So if we go back to our UI manager, we're going to now add a scroll bar, and our scroll bar, so we haven't added it yet. So let me just go up and create it. I was kind of jumping the gun there a bit. So scroll bar as new CLS scroll bar. And so when we go down, what we can do then is simply set the scroll bar position, and we basically use the frame, but we're going to use the frame end position. So let's try this out. Now we're going to get an error because I have to actually update the frame. So this should be frame position. And once we have the frame end position, we run on the code. So let's go back now that we have it correct and try it. And you can see that the scroll bar is moving on, as is the position cell. So let me move the scroll bar on. It changes the position to 686 or 357 or whatever, but we don't have that change event in yet, so it won't change the chart. But you can see very little code really needed on the scroll bar, and we were able to update it quite nicely. So we're going to add our scroll bar event now, and this is a change event rather than a click event, but it's much the same. It just means this will fire, this sub will run as soon as we change the scroll bar position. And we're going to call move scroll bar, which we haven't created yet. So we'll create another module, and this module will have our scroll bar stuff. And again, this is just a very small module that just does the scroll bar. And we'll use move scroll bar as our sub. And so what this does is it creates a movement object. Because the scroll bar has moved, we want to move to a position. So if we move the scroll bar, we want to move to whatever position the scroll bar moved to. So we're going to use movement, move to current, so whatever the current position is. So we have our move to current now, and this one is just going to be moved to a position. So move to whatever the position, and we supply the position in this case. So when we move right, it just moves right by the interval, but when we want to move to a position, we give it the position that we want to move to. So it's going to move to whatever the current position is. Then we're going to call read from sheet, and that will give us the current position. Just want to make sure that the current position is up to date. Now we're in our frame position, and this time we're going to move to a given position. So this is our move to position, and we take a position. So the new position is coming in. And in this case, we obviously don't assign the position, but we want to check that the new position is valid. So in theory, the new position should always be valid, because we're only, the range is set within the range of the scroll bar, but sometimes it can be wrong. So it's always good just to check for sure. So we're just saying that the new position is greater than or equal to 1, and the new position is less than the number of values. So if that happens, move it to the position. If it doesn't happen, we don't move it. So generally speaking, anytime we move to a position, it should probably just move anyway. It's just in certain cases there may be an issue. So I just have to change the name of this one, move to current. We just have to rename it. So let's go back to frame position. And then we go to click events. And let's move the scroll bar to see exactly what happens. So it's not doing anything. That's because we have to assign it to the change event. So we do assign macro and our scroll bar change event. Now when we move it, you'll see that it will stop in the code. So we call the move scroll bar, and it moves to current, and then it does the normal thing, does the clash initialize, sets our sheet, and so on. So in the movement manager, it's going to move to current. It's going to read from the sheet again, so we get the current position, and then we're going to move to that position. So in the position, just checks if it's valid, and then if it's valid, updates the frame with the new position. So let's run it now without any breakpoints. We move it to position 1, and you can see that it's now at position 1. So now we can take it and we can drag it. Let's put it at 402, and you can see that it moves to the position, actually 435. So you can see that it moves to the position where 435 is the end point and 336 is the start point. So we can move it all the way on 829. You can see then it goes from 730 to 829, and we can move it to the very last one, 1000, and it moves. So you can see it's quite easy to add the scroll bar in terms that it doesn't really require a lot of code, but the result of using it is very, very effective. Now that we've looked at the scroll bar, we've got our infrastructure in place. Let's start adding all the other items that we want to do. So we want to add left, we want to add pause, we want to add stop, and we want to add play. So these should be very easy to add now because, as I said, we've got most of the structure in place already. So let's go ahead and create our click events for each of the different buttons on our worksheet. So for example, we're going to have left, we're going to have pause, we're going to have stop or reset, and we're going to have play. Now, once we've added these click events, what we want to do is to assign the macros to them. So assign these subs from each of the buttons. So now let's go to our mod move module, and in the mod move module we're going to call the movement class in most cases, but in one case you'll see that we'll be calling the reader class. So move left is going to be the same as move right, and we're just going to call a move left movement. Now reset is going to be move to the start, like we're resetting our values. Play is going to have a play sub, and that's going to be different than how we're doing other things. We'll see that just a little bit later. And then finally pause. So pause is a bit different. When we pause, all we're actually doing is setting playing to stopped. And our play loop that we'll write later basically reads this each time it goes through the loop, and if it's set to stopped, it will stop playing. So very simple. So that's all that pause is actually doing, just setting the value to stopped, and we do that by setting playing to equal to false. So in our movement manager, we're going to create each of the subs that we need. We don't need one for pause, so we've kind of dropped one. Move left is pretty much the same as move right. And reset that we're using is going to be move to the start. So play, we're not going to do the play one yet, and we're going to do move start and move left at the moment. We'll get to play in a moment. So play is the most complicated one, but still not too complicated. We'll have a look at that in a moment. So let's update the frame position for all our frames. So move left, very similar to move right. The only difference is that we're subtracting the move interval rather than adding the move interval. And of course we have to do a check, and our check is if it's at the start rather than at the end. And we check the position against our starting position. So if new position is greater than equal to start position. And the first position, as I said before, the first position is just 1. But if we wanted to change that in the future, it's good to be using get first position because we only need to change in one position. Now move to start, very simple. We're just going to be setting this to get first position. You can see once we have the code in place and our structure in place that a lot of this is very simple. So all we're doing with call update frame, we're calling two subs we've already created, get first position and then update the frame. So let's do a debug compile to check for errors, and you can see that we have a move start. Now that should be reset, so let's just change this. And now that we've changed this, let's go to the chart and test out what we've done. So if we click right, you can see that it moves right. So this is the one we had already. So let's go back and go left. You can see that we're moving left. And when it reaches the first item, it will stop. So it doesn't keep going, which could cause us errors. So right again. And this time we're going to reset. We click reset and you can see that it brought us back to position 1. So it did move to the start. So now I'm going to write playing here. And then when I click on pause, you'll see that it sets playing to stopped. So when we do the play loop, this will in fact be enough to stop the play loop running. So the play loop is the most interesting one. So let's have a look at how we do that. So it's a little bit trickier than the other ones because we're playing it in real time rather than just moving one at a time. So the first thing we do is set playing to true. And then we do our do loop. So we'll enter the loop and we'll loop until the frame position is at the end. Now we don't have an is at the end yet, so let's write that sub. And the second thing we check is playing. Has playing been set to stopped? So if we've clicked paused and be somewhere in that loop, every time it reaches the end of the loop, it will check and it will stop. So we're going to write is at the end. Now we've already got check position at the end. We give it a position and say, is this at the end? And we're going to run the same thing again. We're going to check position at the end, but we're going to use our current position. We're just saying, are we at the end now? So we say is at the end equals check position at the end, and we give it our current position, which is frame.end position. So now that we have that, what we want to do first of all is we want to move right. So when we're playing, we're basically just moving right, and every time we move right we have some kind of pause interval, and then we keep moving right, and we'll keep doing that until the loop conditions fail. So it's no longer playing or we've reached the end. So we move right, and just like when we move right normally, we want to update our position. So we update our position with the frame. And now at this point we want to sleep or we want to pause. So we'll pause for a second or something, and then we'll go again through the loop and go again through the loop, and this gives the idea that we're actually playing through the data. So then we read from the sheet. So we read the latest from the sheet. So this is to make sure if stopped, if it has been changed to stop, that we're actually getting the latest value. And we're going to have a sleep loop. Now I'm giving the sleep loop 1000 milliseconds. So let's go and see what our sleep loop is. So we insert this module. Now I'm going to copy and paste the code here. So this is Windows API code. How we use the API is like this. So I've written a sub based on this. We just use the get tick count. And we basically get the tick count, and we run through a loop, and when the loop ends, when we get to the end, it exits. So this gives us the illusion of pausing. Now we have an error here, is at end, and that's because I've put is at end as private, so I'll just make that public. And yeah, everything is okay. So let's press play. So we press play, it's just gone on to 1. So I think the problem here actually is that I gave it 1000 milliseconds and it's actually in seconds. So it should be actually a second that I'm giving it. So if we go back now and run it again, it should run okay. So you can see that it's running every second, it's updating and adding a new point. So if we press pause, you can see that it stopped. Now one thing we want to do is the speed. You can see the speed here is 4x. And we're not actually reading the speed at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to add just a simple function, and the function converts the speed. Like for example, it will say 4x equals quarter of a second. And it does this using a select statement. So we get in the different text for the speed, and we just simply convert that into a number which is in seconds. So now that we've got that done, we can just put it into our sleep loop as a parameter. So get the timeline from speed, and the parameter we give that is the actual speed, and we get that very easily from our reader. You can see again the advantages of having a good structure in place. We don't have to look around or try and read from the sheet again. We've already got that in our reader. So now let's play. Now we're playing at the speed of 4x, which is a quarter of a second per interval. And if we change that to normal, you'll see that it goes slower. It's just going every second. So 2x is every half a second. And let's put it back to 4x, which is every quarter of a second. And anytime we can press pause, and you can see that it stops it. So that's how we do our play. So we're playing through all the data. And this is exactly how it works. So now we're going to write the code to update the chart. So in other words, if the user makes changes to the chart sheet or to the chart range, this code will update it when we click on the update chart button. So we're going to call the initialize, and we're going to have this in another sub, and this sub will be mod chart. So initialize chart sub will be in the mod chart. So let's create this new module. And we'll call it, as I said, mod chart. So the first thing we need is the reader, because we want to read the data and the different configuration settings. So we want to read these from the worksheet, and then we're going to pass these to our UI manager. Now remember, our UI manager, its job is to take care of the things on our user interface. So such as the scroll bar, the chart, and if we had trading, it would do that as well. Now we're going to have a new sub there. We're going to call it reset controls, and we're going to write that in our UI manager class module. So let's add it to the top of the module, and the other ones you can see we have update position, which was very, very simple. So every time we move the chart, we call update position to update the different controls. So we're passing in the settings reader. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get the worksheet. So the worksheet that is specified on our worksheet, so it's specified in cell B7, and we get this back from the reader, the chart worksheet. So the chart worksheet, we give this to worksheets, and this will give us back that worksheet. So once we have the sheet, what we want to do next is we want to move to the very start of our frame. So we want to move to the very first position on the chart. So we use frame position to give us a frame. So that will create the initial frame. Now we're going to use width here so that we don't have to keep repeating reader everywhere. So we pass frame width, current position, number of prices, and move interval. So we pass these to the frame position. So we moved then the frame to the start. So we set the scroll bar settings. Now the scroll bar settings, these are the initial settings of the scroll bar, it's not the position. So we basically say the number of values, which is number of prices, the move interval, and the link cell, which is the cell with the current position. And so we're going to update position, which now will actually update the chart, update the scroll bar, and anything else that we need. And we pass it to the frame. So you can see not a huge amount of code, and that basically resets everything. Let's update the chart. Now first of all, we've got to do an assign macro, so we're going to assign that to the update chart click event, which is down at the bottom. So if we click on update chart, it resets our chart, but it doesn't make it a kind of noticeable difference because we have the same value, same range, etc. So we set it to 501. So we've now 500 prices. And if we click on update chart, it's updated the chart. And when we drag the scroll bar, you'll see that we've only got up to 500 prices. Now if we go back to 489 and press play, it's going to stop at 500 prices because that's all that we have. So this is a very useful setting on our worksheet, allows the user to select a range of prices and the worksheet that they want to use. So this is the completed trading simulator. You can see we can play data from the start. We can do things like change our interval. Now we have to stop if we want to actually update the interval because we don't have that within the loop. So just press stop, press play again. You can see now that it's got a new interval. So we can configure all this playing very, very easily. We can pause it, we can move left or right, and we can do so many things. So this is very, very useful if we want to test our trading. So we want to take test prices and we want to practice trading with them. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any questions, comments or queries, please add them to the comment section below. And don't forget that you can download all the code that I used today in the description below. Now if you liked the video, please click on the like button, and if you'd like to get notified of my upcoming videos, then click on the subscribe button and the bell icon beside it. Hope to see you in the next video.